Hello guys, it's Archie. I'm back again for another special edition of the ADHD Care podcast. I've got another special guest with me today, and I've got Mollie. So Mollie is a young person who was diagnosed with ADHD a few years ago. Today we're doing a special, given that we are heading towards the exam season, and a lot of youngsters will be taking their examinations finals this year in the next month or so. So I thought we could focus this special edition of the podcast on just finding out from Mollie her journey living with ADHD, particularly how she found her just coping over the last sort of year and a bit when she was doing her finals exams herself. Also in the studio with me is Mollie's mum, Karen. So Karen is just taking a back seat, and I'm sure Karen will have a few words to say here and there. And I'll be speaking to Karen actually as it goes next week. We'll be doing another special edition of ADHD and education with a focus on examinations with another special guest that will be joining us, Catriona. It's all confirmed, by the way. So first of all, I want to say welcome to Mollie.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
Good to see you. So, if you, did you have a good Easter, first of all?
Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah?
Bit of revision, because I've got exams, so convenient.
Right. So, Mollie's in year 12.
Yeah.
Right. So, as I said just in the introduction there, I was seeing another young person just now, actually, before I sat down with you, who was about to do his finals, his GCSEs, next month. So, just for you, because obviously you are in year 12 now and you've just gone past through the exam, you've done your GCSEs, and I hear that you did really well in the exam, so yeah. Congratulations. I want to sit down with you just to talk to you about how your journey was, particularly during that kind of exam GCSE period, and what was helpful for you, what you found stressful. And I know, from talking to your mum, Karen, there are things that you adopted yourself, implemented to get you through that stress that you were going through with the support of your mum, of course. So let's go back to beginning, right? When were you diagnosed with attention deficit disorder that you have specifically? Mm-hmm. Is the ADD, which is the inattentive part of the ADHD.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long ago were you diagnosed?
I think it was April 2020, so 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. And did you know much about ADHD before you came for the assessment, before you were diagnosed?
I didn't really know much about it. I watched a couple of videos before I came, so I kind of could see what it really was in case. Yeah. And then learn more about it after.
Who was was it yourself that put yourself forward for the assessment, or did it come from teachers? Did it come from your mum?
No, it was mum, because we were kind of starting to head into lockdown online learning, and I just wasn't doing the work, but I just wasn't, none of it was going in my head. I was just writing it down as quick as I could, and my grades before hadn't been great.
Right.
And yeah.
And exercise.
I did a lot of exercise, which kind of distracted me from not from doing the work, but it took away from Well,
that was the thing that made me think there might be something, was the fact that when we were in lockdown, the first thing I noticed was that Mollie, she always did a lot of exercise at school anyway, lots of sport and whatever, but obviously one of the things about lockdown was the limit on how often we could go out, and that was kind of when the ADHD or the ADD symptoms kind of became really clear.
Yeah, because the sport was tiring me out at school, so when I came home I was asleep and whatever, so I wasn't really sleeping very well in lockdown because I couldn't do as much as I was at school. Mm.
But then you kind of used it as well as a way of, so you think about the 500k cycling over 6 weeks or whatever, as a way of sort of self-regulation.
Yeah.
And to help you through that difficult time.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's when we came to you.
Yeah. And had there been a question about ADD or ADHD previously to that, like in primary school, for example?
I don't know, you'd be the one to say if there was. When I look back on photos and stuff now, I'm like, yeah, there definitely was. I wasn't like the other kids in the photos and stuff. Like, I'd be the one throwing a bit of sand or something somewhere else.
Yeah.
And you prefer to be outside doing than you were never a child that would sit inside at break time or anything like that. She wanted to be running around So that was probably, should have been the first thing, really, wasn't it? I think the biggest thing for me was the sport, and that she's obviously realising now that that's what you were using to regulate yourself, even from a very early age.
Yeah.
And you quite often see it in the questionnaires, do they run around and climb and whatever? Well, you didn't do that, but you did run around a lot. And if you weren't, you had to be physically exhausted to be able to sleep from tiny.
So yeah, you sounds like you were channeling your ADHD excess energy into sports and stuff. Which a lot of young people tend to do anyway, as you know. So, and then was it like a turning point for you when you came for the assessment? You went through the process and then subsequently got the diagnosis. What was that like? How did you feel it explained some of your difficulties? Did you feel at that point?
Yeah, I think it was good to just see, like, to know there was something, and even if it couldn't be changed, like, I'm always going to have ADD, but it was like then I could start finding out different ways around it, or like how I can actually learn properly, and just what impact it will have, and how I can kind of adjust to it a bit more.
I'm quite fascinated having a young person on this podcast. I don't think we haven't had one before, so I've referred to a lot of, because I work with young people, as you know, but I think it's quite refreshing for some, I'm sure, for our listeners to get a perspective from you firsthand and talk to me about what were some of the I don't know if you felt that there was people looked at you in a different way post diagnosis. Were you very open with your diagnosis with your peers, or can you think, if you think back to that time?
I think because obviously we were in lockdown for when I had the diagnosis done. I think then when I came back to school in the September, I was a bit quiet about it at first, and then I found a couple of friends in my year that had been diagnosed, and we kind of talked about sort of what we had gone through, how they found things, because they'd been diagnosed a lot earlier than I had, and what they had done since, and kind of how it affected them. Yeah. And then I became a bit more open with my friends about it, and since then we kind of just get on with it really well. Yeah.
What's quite refreshing from nowadays, just seeing when you go on social media, there's lots of talk about ADHD in a positive way amongst young people. You go on TikTok and there's lots of posts and stuff. So it seems quite fashionable in a way, if you want to call it that. Yeah. Having ADHD, and people are proud to kind of celebrate their differences and want to share experiences, and hopefully. Some of the young people I've seen in the clinic, it was actually them that mentioned it to their parents that can they come forward for an assessment, which is again a big turnaround to like a few years back, where it's more kind of the parents dragging the young person to the clinic. Yeah, I
think that's the hard thing though with the social media, is that quite a lot of some of it is positive, but then quite a lot of it you do sometimes see people kind of using the ADHD to their advantage, or saying they've got it when they haven't, they're just struggling with something, or I think that's the other hard thing in schools. It kind of, I noticed it in my last few years at school, it started to become quite competitive, and like people would say they had it to look cool or whatever. So that was the only hard thing about it, really, with the media.
So after you got the diagnosis, what support did you have post-diagnosis?
Well, quite a lot from my mum about it, and help with work and all of that. I didn't have masses of support from school, really. It was kind of just, there's extra time, and then that was it, really. Didn't really get much through school, but it was more just home support and from friends and stuff.
Did you take time to look into ADD, understanding it, doing some research for yourself to understand yourself a bit more, like come to peace with the diagnosis and understand what your challenges are? And
I read quite a lot of stuff about it, listened to podcasts, watched a lot of videos on it, and different kinds of videos, not just what is ADHD and some American person talking to you about it, like actual videos of like day in the life with ADHD, and then you can kind of like see yourself in moments of it, and then you kind of start to think, oh yeah, that's how they deal with it, or that's how they don't, and that's still fine, they keep going with it. So And
I know obviously you started the journey on medication as well. And what was that experience for you, just going on it, and how it's been? What's your experience of taking medication?
I think it's been quite good to, like, I've noticed a difference when I take it and when I don't. And I think that was where it was really helpful to talk to friends, to hear what they were on and how they deal with it differently and what they take, how they take it. Because things like the time limits of them, so knowing that if I want to sleep, I take it. So like 12 hours, I take it at 7 a.m. I know I'll crash at 7 p.m, but that's perfect for me then to go to sleep. Or like with the 4-hour top-up of methylphenidate, I know that especially when I was revising, if I only wanted to do a bit in a day, I could just take that. And I knew then I had a 4-hour window and I had to work in that. So it kind of helped me, it motivated me more knowing that I had it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Alongside medication, we were talking just before you came on about, apps and things that people use alongside medication to help them manage their symptoms. Is there anything that you use for yourself just on a day-to-day, if you think from a young person, student, day-to-day, to help you just generally remember things, to be much more organised, apart from your mum, obviously, do lots of the scaffolding for you. Is there anything that you found useful at all that you feel you might want to share with?
See, I think I've gone through so many apps on the apps. Every time I have a moment where I forget something, I look up a different app and I'm like, oh, reminders. None of it really helped me because you have to actually set the reminder and then turn it off. And it just didn't work for me. But I've found recently that I've got just a physical diary. So in school, I write everything in my diary for the day it's due. Because a lot of people I know write it the day it's set. And that didn't really work for me because I wouldn't go back to the day to look at it. So that worked for me. And also, when I was especially in exams, and we've started doing it again now, I wrote myself a physical calendar that I stuck to the kitchen wall because I knew I'd look at it. It was next to where we keep like food in the cupboard, so it was there all the time. And then I could see it. And like before exams, I always had giant sticky notes saying how many days I had until an exam, what to prioritise, and all of that. Yeah. So that helped me remember more because it was just there.
Yeah. Which leads me on to my next question around what we wanted to cover today, is the survival tips on examinations, whatever exams you take in A-levels, GCSEs. So I think you touched on some of those things there. You've got your planner, you've got your calendar, you've got your physical diary, which is great, because you don't see a lot of people using physical diaries, even adults. So anything else? What would you say? So if you was to talk to a young person right now and they are struggling or about to sit their examination finals, what sort of things would you say to them to help, that might be helpful, that you found helpful?
I think, without trying to sound blunt, but often not listening to what schools are saying you have to do almost. Like, you should listen to what the school has to say. But I think I fell into, especially before I was diagnosed, I fell very deep into the trap of you have to revise in this way, you have to make flashcards, you have to make written notes. And it just wasn't working for me, and that's when my grades started to go, because they were fine when I could learn stuff off the top of my head, but then when you actually had to apply it, writing stuff down back to back just didn't work for me. So I think actually trying stuff and then applying it to a past paper question, that was the best thing in terms of the exams that worked for me. But you don't want to get too hooked on what everyone else is doing and not give in to what everyone else is doing. Like, if someone gets a 9 in their GCSE because they've done this method, it's not going to work for you, or it might not. So
yeah, because it's quite interesting, because you were the first group to sit exams, physical exams, post COVID, in person, whatever you want to call the term, because prior to you, everything was kind of like based on predicted grades, and so there must have been a lot of stress and pressure on your part. Just to think that we are the first cohort to go through this post-COVID.
Especially with grade boundaries and stuff as well, because we didn't know what it would be like. Everyone's talking about, they got these grades, the year before got this, and it's just trying to focus on what you're doing, like in the moment, instead of the other one, like what other people have done.
When you started year 11, because we didn't know where things would be come May with COVID and things. So at that point, I think in your head, you're probably thinking predicted grades. So the pressure was like, you have to do well from the get-go. So
even our January exams, we thought they would be our grades for the rest of it. So I think everyone stressed a lot for the January ones. And then obviously it ended up we actually had exams, but
yeah. And with the actual revision itself, if we delve into the actual, like, I'm sitting down, I'm looking at my exam timetable, how do I break down in terms of, okay, I've got this coming up, I've got this amount of time to do my revision, prioritization, breaking things into smaller, those little strategies, have you employed any? Like, what was it that was helpful for you during that time?
See, I think for me it was more, I know a lot of people do revision guides where they write certain topics or this part of a subject they're going to do at 9 a.m. on this day. But for me, it just didn't really work because I don't know. One day I might sleep in a bit longer. So then I've missed my 9 a.m. biology cells, which would just throw me then because then I'm like, well, I've got to catch that up. I wrote, like I said about the Post-it notes, I would have like priorities. I've got this exam, I need to do this. And then I'd go through, I always had either the specification or just a list that I'd written, and I'd go through and red, orange, green them all of how I felt, and I'd try questions on it to see if I actually did know it. I think that worked for me, just actually not going into the small details. But then I know some people do like to do it, but for me to take the time to do the small, this day, this time, it just didn't work. I tried revision timetables, but it's sticking to them, and then what do you do if you don't do that time? It's then fitting it in another time, and actually you get the work done. I used to set myself little 45-minute timers, and I'd do it in blocks, 45 minutes, then I'd have 15 minutes, go and do something else, go get chocolate downstairs or something like that, come back up, set another 45 minutes, and then, because then sometimes you get to the 45 minutes and you're like, oh, I could keep going, in which case good, restart it again. But if not, then you've done 45 minutes is a good amount to then have a little break. So that worked for me. So.
A lot of the young people that I speak to as well, they struggle with getting started on tasks. Is that procrastination, the motivation to get going? Was that the same for you? And if it was, again, what was helpful for you to overcome that?
Yeah, I think for me, it was getting into the habit of what I'd do each morning when I was revising. So I used to revise in the morning because I felt like that was better for me. And it would just be, I knew that I'd wake up, have breakfast, chill for a bit. I used to give myself till 9. So if I woke up at 8:30, I'd have half an hour, get ready, and then I would get my work done. But I'd give myself a deadline of time and see what I did in that time. I think it's just not, like, I didn't really think about the grades I wanted at the end to get, like, that didn't, it motivated me, but not to the extent of kind of sit there and write for hours. It was more thinking about how I'd feel in the exam, like what if I open the first page and I don't actually know the answer, but it was something really simple. It was more that I kind of used to motivate me to actually get started on it.
Yeah.
And I quite often, with the red, orange, green, I'd start with the orange. A lot of people say start with the red if it's hardest, but I used to start with the orange or even a green if I wasn't motivated, because then once you've done it, if you get the marks on a green question, then you're like, oh, I can do this, and then start to break it down into the harder ones once you've got going. I think that worked for me.
Yeah. Just coming to you, Karen, there.
Gagging to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you were there, obviously, with Mollie, trying to support her during that period that we're talking about. Yeah. What was that like?
The things to say, your year 10 exams were a car crash,
yeah.
and that was pre-medication. And I think one of the things we haven't yet touched on is the anxiety around all of that, and that brought up, but I'm sure you'll come back to that in a minute. But in terms of actual practical stuff, I think from a parental point of view, the only bit of advice I'd say to parents now with kids doing exams would be, and this with my educator hat on as well, would be pick your battles, decide what is negotiable and what is absolutely not. And with Mollie, we had a very full and frank discussion about what had not worked for the year 10 exams, because she'd been told to revise in a particular way, and she got quite sort of het up about doing, the teacher said, I've got to do it this way or that way. And I said, well, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And we looked at different ways for the year 11 exams, and that was a turning point, wasn't it? The medication plus different ways of working, I think, would you say? But just really simple stuff. So pick your battles, and we chose we wanted to have a life outside of exams. So we said, let's get it all done in the morning, when most people get up in the morning, and by the time you've faffed about, had breakfast, everybody's had a shower, it's probably 10 or 11 o'clock anyway. So actually saying to Moll, get finished by 1, and then the rest of the day I won't ask you, there's no pressure, you just do what you want. You can stay in bed, you can watch, I don't care. You'll have done your 3 or 4 hours, that was brilliant. So that was one thing, wasn't it? And that was it. And once she'd done the work, we didn't talk about it again. And if she needed help, I was around, but I wasn't hovering. I wasn't helicoptering.
I kept you away for a lot of it.
But equally, we got to a point where you could ask and say, can you download me some past papers? But the red, amber, green thing was brilliant. The RAG rating is always really good thing to do. And we bought giant Post-its. Shouldn't do any plug-in, but I'm going to home... Sainsbury's. In big Sainsbury's do massive giant Post-its, which are like A4 size, and they were a lifesaver because they come in red, amber and green.
Right.
So what Mollie would do is sit down and, well, you can explain, we used to put them on the folders.
So my folders I'd have inside, I'd have lists, or in my textbook I'd have just literally, instead of summarising pages onto another page, just stick a giant Post-it over the page. And I could have 5 or 6 pages worth just on a little Post-it.
Right.
In tiny little notes.
Yeah.
But it worked for me. And
then you reduced it down. So we went from an A4 Post-it down to the small, the normal, what people would call a normal size Post-it. But the idea being that you're doing that whole spaced retrieval, which has been proven to be one of the best things. And Mollie we were just talking off air about dual coding and stuff like that. So that's something you found really, really helpful this year. The kind of elaborative rehearsal and like changing it up from what you would normally do so that it actually sticks more in your head.
We didn't give you a proper introduction, Karen, because certainly apart from just being Mollie's mum, you got years of experience working in special educational needs, being a Senko. Do they still call you Senko?
Yeah.
Senko, of one of the private schools in Surrey. And so again, how do you balance being a Senko, being a mum of a young person going through exams, and where do you know when to hold yourself back, when to get in? How did you manage that? Because I'm sure other parents will be kind of confused in terms of how they can try and support the young person going through the exam period, because you just say you don't want to be overbearing and being too like
I think the biggest thing for me was the year 10 exams, and that was a bit of a seminal moment for both of us because Mollie was really upset, and with both my mum hat and my teacher hat on, I thought we've got to do something here, this isn't right. And I think I always say to the children or young people that I see, your ADHD isn't an excuse, it's an explanation for why you might be seeing things in a different way or interpreting things in a different way, and I think that's really important. And I certainly had that conversation with you, didn't I, about the whole exams thing, and said, right, well, that hasn't worked, so rather than go over why it hasn't worked, because it hasn't, let's move forward now, what can we do going forward? And it had to be a collaborative dialogue, didn't it? We had to sit down and you're going, now stop talking, but we had to have a conversation about what worked for you, and we had to. And Mollie you were quite good at saying to me, you need to back off now, you're getting in my face and I don't need it. And once we established that she had the tools, so she had the physical stuff from me, like the Post-it notes, the red, amber, green, which I think the red, amber, green was probably the biggest thing.
I still do it now all the time.
Yeah, and the physical timetable, because I think that's one thing that is underrated even now.
It makes you more aware. It's not just a notification on a phone. Like I had this planned in on my phone, and it just didn't really hit me until today. Obviously, I was like, "Oh, I've got to do this podcast." But had we actually written it, and we did write it down the other day, and it just there's something more real about having it constantly. Like you're constantly looking at it. You're like, "That's only a few days away."
Yeah.
But I think it's the physicality. You've had to actually pick up a pen,
write it down,
and it's more of a conscious thing than it is when you're just doing it on a phone, and it's all very quick. So that was the first thing about the exams, was that, and pick your battles. If you're a parent, pick your battles. Decide what. To me, it's sleeping, eating, and just feeling that you've done enough. The one thing I said to you is I don't give a monkeys about the grades, actually. Couldn't care less. But what I want you to come out is feeling that you have done your very best and feeling that you have achieved what you set out to do. And that's it. And whether it had been a raft of C's or D's, if you came out going, yes, I did it, then that was all that mattered to me. I couldn't care less about the rest of it. And I'm always saying I don't want you to be defined by exam grades. You're it's about you as a person, nothing to do with this. And actually, if we took it all into context and looked at it, I'd say this has been a massive learning journey.
Did you have any exam concessions at all, any accommodations that were put in place for you?
Yeah, I had 25% extra time, and I typed for English and English.
Yeah. Was that helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, because it gives you it gave me the bit extra that I needed to actually plan what I was going to put. Like, especially in English, it gave me the planning time, whereas other children could still plan and write their thing. I just didn't have the time, and all my paragraphs would be everything all at once, and it just didn't work. And like sciences and maths, it was the checking time, so you could spend more time on a bigger answer and actually then know that you can still go back. It's just it's a safety net almost, to know that you've still got that bit extra.
Yeah.
So.
And I don't know about you, Karen, but some young people might find that being given an extra time might just make them have to stay in the exam for longer than they need to be. I think the message is that they don't have to use the extra time, do they? If they don't need to.
No, they don't have to. But under the guidance, I've got to be really careful what I say now. Under the guidance, if they have to show that they've had the extra time throughout their schooling anyway, throughout the course of study. First of all, for it to be an exam concession. But the other thing is that I think you would say too, what is really hard to factor in as a young person or as an adult is how you're going to feel on the day. Yeah. And in Mollie's year group, having not done exams for 2 years, and in fact for the kids doing A-levels this year, it's going to be very much that. It's the fear of the unknown. So you've got to factor in that, how am I going to feel, and the crumbs moment when you open the paper and you think, oh my God, there's nothing on here, or I've got the wrong booklet, or whatever. And actually the extra time, if it does nothing else but gets you the time, gets you past that stage and enables you to then get going. And you said one of the big things was you procrastinate. And that's a very, very typical ADHD trait. So for those of us who procrastinate to get started, actually that extra time is invaluable. That's 15 minutes for every hour of an exam. That's massive. If you're somebody who needs that time then at the end to go, actually I've finished all the questions, or to go back and check your work like you said. Yeah. So use it. If you've got it, if school have given it to you, please use it. In the real thing, you don't have to use it. You can go, but I think until you've actually sat an exam, keep trying it.
Is the maximum time? Is it 25%? Is that the maximum?
No, there is. You can have more, but it would be very unusual. And there's lots of different things that would have to happen for that to take place. I think the biggest thing is that also the exam board is still pushing for kids to have, and Katrina and I will talk about this next week, rest breaks rather than extra time. But for an ADHD, rest breaks just don't work, because you're stopping somebody who already has a problem with getting started or staying focused. Yeah. And saying to them, you can stop and start again. It helps if you're hypermobile, I guess, and you're having to write lots, to be able to stop and do that, a bit of stretching or whatever. But no, I think personally, I think the extra time for you has made all the difference. Yeah, and you've had it now in your new school with A-level stuff where you didn't have it. We can explain.
Yeah. Well, no, I didn't get it initially. Up until pretty much now, I haven't been getting it in my new school. And my grades have just, since I've got it in one of them, because I take English Lit, so that's quite a big one for me, where having the actual time to plan it really is the difference between like a B or a D. Yeah. So I've really noticed it now, that when I can sit there and plan it out, my grades have just gone back up to what I knew I could get. Yeah. But I just wasn't, because I couldn't physically do it. And that's the hardest thing, is like, in your head exactly what you need to write. Yeah. But you haven't got the time to write it how you want to. So you're there writing and it's just all goes. And then the more stressed you get about the time, the worse the writing gets. And it's just a bit of an endless little loop.
Which, again, I don't want to go into too much detail about this, because we'll be discussing it next week, because there's 3 elements to it. There's the motivation, the procrastination, and then the processing speed element to that, which the extra time would definitely be quite helpful, because slow starters can take a while to get going, and just even performing, processing things in your head and stuff. Fast forwarding from your GCSEs, you're now in year 12.
Yeah.
So you moved schools.
Yeah, moved schools.
Yeah. What was that transition like?
See, I think for me it was alright, because I knew some people there. I hadn't been to any of the open things or anything, so that was a bit more daunting. But I chose to go to a school instead of a college, because I liked the kind of still the school setting. You've still got the control from, I guess, the teachers more than you would in a college, and like you've got freedom, but it's controlled freedom. Yeah. So like I know a lot of friends that have gone to colleges and are struggling because they just aren't. You don't have to show up to your lessons really. It's not permitted. Like you just don't have to do it. So they just don't, and then
you like the
grades.
routine.
I like the routine
of going in 9 till whatever it is, 9 till 3. You need the routine and the structure that helps you function better.
Yeah.
But how does it feel going from having like 8 or 10 lessons to like 3?
It's weird because I think if it was able to do GCSEs but as A-levels and you had all the time in the world, I would have done it because I liked doing all the different subjects. I like my 3 now, but still I'm thinking, could I do an extra one next year? Could I do an extra subject along the side? Because I do kind of miss having all of the subjects. But I think it's quite good because you've got a lot more time, and that's one of the hard bits that I noticed at the start, is then with the A-levels you've got the freedom more. And my old school, we used to have free periods even when we had GCSEs, whereas a lot of my friends at this new school just didn't have that at the school. So they're struggling a lot more with what they do in the time where they have no lessons, whereas I was kind of used to that working environment. But I think still you get set work to do before a lesson, so you have to pre-read, and it's getting your head around all of that and actually doing it, because you're like, is the pre-reading actually important if I'm about to learn it?
Yeah.
But actually it's quite helpful to then feel like you're on it when you get to the lesson.
And the independence that's required of you as well, being treated as a young adult.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of preparing you for university as well, isn't it? So.
Yeah, it's nice because it's a gentle independence. Like, it's not just, you've got GCSEs, you're 16, do your own thing now and try and get the good grades at the end. It's more of a, you've got the GCSEs, will gradually kind of work you up towards the independence, like the full university. So. Yeah, I quite like it more.
What subjects are you doing for A-levels?
DT, psychology and English literature.
Right. And what is your plan just going forward, like university?
I don't know. I might either go to university and do psychology, or maybe like design psychology, or I'd do an apprenticeship. I've always kind of said apprenticeship or join the army, because I'd like to earn the money more than I would. Like, I don't want to be in debt. I'd rather earn the money and have a job than be stuck in school with massive debt building up.
Yeah, exactly. And I know you're doing fantastic work in the neurodiverse world, like you're giving talks, and do you want to tell us a little bit more about that? Because that's quite unique to get a young person doing what you're doing. So, So for my DT, I'm doing kind of a project aimed towards like animal assisted therapy. So I've spoken lots with people in that kind of like department, I guess, and what they like with the sensory aspects of it and all of that. So that's been quite interesting to see where I could go with that sort of thing. So that would link into, I guess, design psychology and kind of why things are done. So that's kind of good for careers. It's given me that kind of insight. And yeah, I've spoken up. Like, I've kind of stood my ground as a neurodiverse person quite a lot. Like, if someone says something that I just don't think is good, so like the other day I was talking with someone that's doing some community project, and they had tried to make it as like disability friendly as they could, but the play park was up a hill from the car park, and the toilets, they'd made some disabled toilets, but they were miles away from the disabled parking, so it just all didn't really, it wasn't as friendly as it could have been. So I think I just, said it how it was.
Also, challenging hidden disabilities.
Yeah. Especially in sport,
Yeah, so explain a bit more about that, so some of the things that have happened.
There's just not, people aren't as aware of the kind of more hidden disabilities as I think they should be. Like, there is stuff in the media about ADHD, that sort of stuff, but you have to look for it to find it. So I think, especially in some generations, they're not accepting, they're just not, like, they've not got the knowledge about it. So I think sometimes it's kind of not forcing them to learn about it, but you've got to actually introduce them to it so that they can understand you better.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I'm just intrigued to get your perspective. Or why do you think that is?
Because it wasn't, like, now it's a big thing, kind of neurodiversity, like everything about that is kind of, it's more promoted, whereas I think back in the day it wasn't, you just were who you were, which is nice. People just didn't really care about what like there were differences in people, but it wasn't really that big. Whereas now it's you're this, you're that. I think in some ways puts people under a certain like confinement of a like bracket. I guess you're neurodiverse, you have to do this. Like there's an expectation put like kind of among people by society in a way. But then I think it's just society's moved on and other people haven't.
Yeah.
So it's kind of bridging the gap.
And people's understanding on conditions such as ADHD, the lack of their understanding of it, and
well, everyone just assumes it, so you can't sit still, you can't do that. People don't see the actual. And I think that's the biggest one we've been challenging recently. Is people don't see the internal. It's not just can't sit still. It's the overthinking or like that sort of side of it. People don't actually see. So and the stress and anxiety that can bring. Yeah. Living a life in a neurotypical world where you are having to feel like you're fitting in, you have to fit in. Yeah. And like trying to adapt to the surroundings, but you shouldn't really have to make yourself fit in. There should be, people should accept you for who you are, but I think that's one of the struggles. I think in schools as well that comes up quite a lot because teachers often don't really, it's not they don't understand it, because I know they've had the training on like neurodiverse disabilities, all of that sort of stuff. They've had the training on it, but it's how much of the training they've actually like trying to reproduce almost in their lessons and stuff. They've still got the way they were taught back in like the 70s or the 80s, and it's trying to get teachers to understand like what it is, because quite often you find on like school reports and stuff the amount of times I've had she doesn't focus very well, or she didn't hand this homework in, her homework's not on time all the time, and it's trying to explain to them that sometimes I need a reminder or something to say I've got homework due. If I don't hear you tell me the homework, or like writing it on a board instead of just verbally telling a class that they've got homework. Yeah.
We are discussing all of this next week. We're doing a special edition of this podcast where we will be focusing on education, or all of those elements that you brought. So I'm going to reserve my comments till next time.
Anxiety is something to talk about, because you've had a lot of that around exams and about this fitting in and whatever. Because there's an awful lot of stuff about, certainly in the media at the moment, it's all about the understanding of ASD. So Chris Packham's fantastic programs that he did.
The Vanish advert.
All of that. And I think ADHD is still on a bit of a back burner, and I think especially with women. I mean, I think I watched this, for me, what was a really seminal documentary was Tanya Bardsley, when she did her documentary about her ADHD journey, and talking about suicide and all of that. And I think the dark side of ADHD, which we don't often touch on. We talk about all the wonderful, and I think that whole superpower thing. Oh, it's my superpower, all of that. Sometimes, I think that's what you're referring to.
There's too much emphasis on the positives of it that then people don't see. They only see the positives. Like all you're going to see on the internet is this is ADHD, or this person has got a Nobel Peace Prize, he's also got ADHD, and people are going to be like, oh wow, that's so great, so everyone with ADHD is going to be like that. And then that's where like the documentaries and stuff kind of show the extra layer below that people don't really like see, I guess.
I get it. There has been other cases, not many, where sometimes someone has got themselves into trouble, and then it turns out that they ended up having ADHD, or so it can go either way. I think if you think about Anton Deck and think he's one I can think of, that there was an ADHD diagnosis that came off at the back of an incident that happened most recently. I don't know if you heard about Prince Harry.
No.
Did you hear about Prince Harry?
No.
Okay, right. I'm not sure it's the formal diagnosis. I have to be careful what I'm saying. But in one of the interviews he did with an American journalist, or psychotherapist apparently, who sort of mentioned about possibility of ADHD. And I saw an article at the back of that which mentions about that. So very interesting. We talk a lot about masking with autism and ADHD. And also for yourself being a female with ADHD as well. Did you feel there was times in your life where you felt like you had to fit in and hide some of your challenges? Yeah,
definitely. Especially in like schools and stuff, you don't want people to. You want to fit in with the cool gang or whatever. You don't want people to see you as like the odd one with the ADHD or just the one that doesn't fit in. So I think I definitely did try and hide a lot of things. I had quite a good. Still got a good friend group around me, so they kind of support me, I guess. But I think I definitely still in public situations try and kind of hide it, I guess. And you want to appear as the person that everyone else is almost. But yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when the whole anxiety stuff creeps in.
Yeah, and that's something I hear often enough in the clinic where it gets to the point where the masking and holding it in will just get to you eventually, and you just crumble in some cases, or anxiety, mood issues will start to take effects, and
phones get thrown.
Which again is we're not judging. It's a safe space to be able to be very open about this, and this is something that, as I said, I come across in here quite a lot. So I
think that's worth mentioning. There are lots of forms of expression of frustration and the things that you're talking about, and I think people still think of ADHD as being hopping around the place or whatever, or typical, and I don't want to belittle anybody by saying it, but typical sort of mediarized forms of self-harm, for example. So it's not as straightforward as just having an anger outburst. It might be somebody pulls all their hair out. It might be trichotillomania is a big one. It's, somebody else was saying about picking at spots, for example, those sorts of repetitive behaviours and stuff like that. So I think as a parent that's something to be aware of as well.
I think also the fatigue from masking all day, like if you a normal school day it can be really knackering as a teenager, just not from the workload, from trying to fit in to everyone else's expectations, that by the time you get home you're exhausted, and then someone wants to talk to you, or you want to cook dinner or tidy your room or whatever, and it's just that's all. You just want to just go be silent for a few minutes, just actually gather yourself.
No, I 100% agree with you there. It's and that's the other side of this that doesn't really get spoken about, because what then happens, people focus on the reaction rather than actually looking at the underlying cause in someone that doesn't have ADHD or a diagnosis. But it's the outburst, it's the pulling hair, it's the self-harming. In some cases, we talked about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I don't know if you know about rejection. Is that something you relate to at all?
I don't really know masses about. Like, I've just kind of heard about it, so right. I don't know. I'm not really. Not too familiar with what it is, but.
I was just going to ask, in terms just within your kind of friendship group or peer group, in terms of things like ADHD, autism, and things. Is that something that gets spoken about very openly, and are people proud to come out and say amongst yourselves as young people that, listen, this is what I've just been diagnosed with? Or is it still how we see mental health conditions and neurodiversity conditions such as ADHD are viewed widely, like what we were talking about earlier? It's just how society views it. What's that like in amongst young people?
I think it's a bit of a mixed one, because I know my friend group, it's very accepted. There's a couple of us that have all got ADHD, and we often chat about it, joke about it. But then I know other friend groups, just still within the school, it's like it's an insult or it's used against people, and it's no one's really very open about it. So I think it depends on the people you're with, really.
But again, social media, from what we see, it's nice and refreshing to see. And certainly when I hear young people, as I said, asking their parents to bring them in forward for an assessment of ADHD. Mum tells me that you've been doing some driving lessons. How's that going?
It's actually quite good. I wouldn't say I'm too bad. I've not hit anything, touch wood.
It's
quite good.
So the plan is to be on mum's insurance then when you do eventually posture. Yeah. I'm sure Karen is thrilled about that.
It's a bit like the driving lessons is a bit like the exams. It's about picking your battles, and I just inwardly wince rather than scream. But there is a massive hole on the passenger side where I keep slamming the brake. And I've now found out what the handle's for on the side of a car. That's been interesting though as well, isn't it? From even with an ADHD perspective. Things like that, even stuff like that. So
you don't think about it as much. Like I just thought, driving, perfect. But then you don't think about like the stress. So I think about booking my test. I'm like, what if I forget what the examiner's just told me? Turn left. What if I turn right? What if, how do I know which lane to be in? What if I forget which lane to be in? Like all of that sort of things. Just the small bits of it.
And that's what you said to me the other day. You're just like, oh my god, I didn't even think about it impacting daily life to that extent. So like driving and think about all the things you've got to think about to drive. Yeah. Which for an ADHD, it's then got, it's squirrels in a row, isn't it? You've got 50 million other things going on, and then they've still got to concentrate on the road. Yeah. So that's been quite a challenge at times, isn't it? And things like, I go nuts, but she wants the radio on, so she needs white noise. That's another thing, the white noise, to be able to concentrate and stuff like that. So
yeah.
And you did that for exams as well with the music, wasn't it?
I always have music on in the background, not music I like, just random songs but kind of quiet, so I don't sing along to them, but they're just kind of there. I quite like that when I'm doing work and stuff, and actually school they've just allowed us to listen to music whilst we're working, because actually they've noticed more people actually get the work done. And it could just be that it was the start of term, people weren't doing it, but then a lot of people, it's quieter, people actually get on with stuff once they've got music on.
During lessons?
No, just like in private, free periods almost.
Oh, right, okay.
So,
oh, wow, gosh.
Yeah.
Things have moved on from when I was at school, gosh. That's amazing. And so what's next for you then? So, we talked about, so away from education, just in terms of your journey, just discovering about yourself. Before you answer that question, I was going to say something earlier. When we were talking about driving and how your ADHD is impacting on you in different other ways than just away from education, academic situations. It's interesting, because you are getting older, you're slowly becoming a young adult. Yeah. There are responsibilities and independence that comes with that. So I suppose that's kind of what you're discovering. Eventually, when you move to university, there'll be the living independently, and then eventually managing your finances yourself, all of that. So again, that will be quite interesting to see how you'll be able to navigate through those challenges. I suppose having an early diagnosis kind of helps you in a way, and be better prepared for going into these crucial stages that you're going through now, becoming as a young adult.
Yeah, I think that's one of the other things that also does cause a lot of anxiety, not just in people with mental health conditions or whatever, just everyone, is that there's, at this point, you don't really know. When I was picking my A-levels, I didn't realise how much of an impact it would have on later, university and stuff like that. You're not aware of that in the moment. I think actually now a lot of people are starting to realise they don't know how to take out a loan, they don't know about any of that, and they're going to have to apply to uni in January or before that. So I think that's one of the things. And jobs and stuff like that. Yeah. Especially with someone with ADHD, I was working at a restaurant for quite a bit of last year, and it was that again, the masking. You're at work, you want to appear how the other people there working do, and it's just exhausting. By the time you get home, you're absolutely knackered.
It's sad. Like people have to do that. I think it's in society where the view of things like ADHD, that people are not very proud. You're not wearing the badge and going I've got ADHD and feel accepted by doing that. Yeah, they're still still living in a judgmental kind of society, and as you say, some parts of the society, some people seem a bit backward in terms of their views on things like ADHD and autism. So I was just asking about going forward, in terms of, do you ever look forward and kind of go, this is the career that I see myself being in? You touched on jobs there after university. Is there something that you can think that would play to your strengths, having ADHD, that you can
I definitely couldn't be a teacher. That's the one thing at the moment I couldn't see
You don't
myself.
be like your mum then.
No. We had to do a psychology study in front of a class, and I just couldn't do that. That's not something for me. There's nothing, I think I switched. I used to have my heart set out on being a vet. I always wanted to be a vet, and I struggled with chemistry a bit, and I ended up doing well in chemistry, so it was fine, but that put me off a bit. I've not really got anything set. I just kind of go with the flow at the moment.
Yeah.
See what grades, like, because at this point, as much as you can say grades don't define it, grades very much define where you're going to end up at the moment. But yeah, see what happens really. I've not got anything set that I want to do.
So, does it scare you eventually moving to university, like having to live away from home, being independent?
No, not really. No, the kind of living at home. Because I'm quite independent anyway. I'm a fussy eater, so I don't really have to worry about fancy uni meals. I'd eat beans on toast all day. So like that sort of aspect of it doesn't really bother me. It'd be more the finding the home. What if you don't find people you like? What if you're not with the people you like? Like, what if everything just doesn't work? Then what do you do? What if you don't like the course? That sort of thing, I think, is more a stressor than moving away.
Not trying to scare you, that is a big transition.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of that with some of my young people. That it's
It's a big jump.
It is a big jump, and it's a shock to the system as well. And you don't realise. It depends, obviously, what university you end up moving to. Like if you're on the up north somewhere, hours and hours away from home. Yeah.
It's a long way if anything did happen.
Yeah.
Like even people that we've got a couple of friends that have gone, they get the flu and they don't know what they're meant to do with themselves. Like, do they go to a doctor?
Yeah.
How do they get onto a doctor? All of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I suppose that's the kind of the next coming hurdle you have to overcome, and then becoming an adult eventually, turning 18. Yeah. But it sounds like you're just kind of living each day as it comes, and just.
Yeah, kind of. I don't have anything set out at the moment that I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. I see things come up and I'm like, oh, that would be a really interesting job. But yeah, there's nothing that stands out to me at the moment. I think it's alright to kind of it's fine to not know. Because I'm not, like sometimes I have days I'm like, oh, I really should know. People are talking about they want to go to St Andrews or they want to go to Cambridge, and I'm a bit like, just apply to places and see. But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it stresses me out, sometimes it doesn't. It's just kind of knowing that at the end of the day there'll always be a job, and then I can go from there really.
Yeah. What's your thought on this, Karen?
She's leaving home on 28th of January next year.
Marked in your calendar.
Yeah.
In your physical diary.
I think in this day and age you can't. As a parent, it's a bit like the whole COVID thing. You can't. If it's taught us one thing, it's taught us that you can't live your life according to a plan, because plans rarely work out, and you have to learn to go with the flow. And if the only thing this period in your life has taught you is a bit of resilience and a bit of having to think on your feet, well, fantastic. That's a massive life skill. Learn. And there's no such thing as a job for life anymore. So do you know what? You are going to have to learn skill set and learn to adapt the skill set that you have to the situation you're in, and find something you enjoy doing, obviously. But at the same time, bills have to be paid. It's all very well wanting to drive somewhere, but you have to have a car, all that kind of stuff. So nobody knows what's going to happen. So I say live life in the moment.
Yeah, because I like to have a plan. I'm one of those people. I like to have it all like set out for me, but actually I feel like it's one of those things that I also don't like when the plan doesn't go the way the plan should go. And this is life, like the future isn't really, God knows what will happen. There'll be probably iPhone 30s by next year sort of thing, so it's not really
and that's probably the thing we fall out most about, is my eternal optimism. I say I'm cup half full, she's cup half empty. But it's quite interesting that it's the adult that's like, well, do what you want, go with the flow, and it's the young person that's actually needs much more. You said you need boundaries and you need the structure. Which again, like, you'd have to then implement these boundaries yourself when you move to university, don't you? Yeah. God, it sounds like we don't try to scare you.
No.
I'm sure you've had these conversations with your mum before, so it's nothing new there. But but if you can try and finish off on a lighter note, just what are the positives that you can say that your ADD diagnosis has given you, if any? you can list any, like, what would you say that would be?
Your ability to think outside the box. You're a brilliant problem solver. You're somebody who can see a solution in it. I would say, and that's me as your parent, not just picking you up. Would you not say that?
No, I can. Like
you're the person, if there's a crowd of people and they're not sure how to get started. So interestingly, for a procrastinator, she's actually one of those people who give a practical task. She'll be the first one to get started and stuck in.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the case for quite a few ADHDers actually. That although we procrastinate with the written word maybe, or the actual, I think we talked about this before. If you're in a crisis, you're the sort of person you want because you're quite calm and quite measured.
Yeah. I think I've learnt more about myself to then play to my strengths in a way. So like I can, like you said with the problem solving, with the DT, that's really, for me it really works because I can see things and I can like sort of picture what I want to make or that sort of thing. And
empathy as well, I think.
Yeah.
Understanding of other people.
Yeah.
And tolerance, I think that's the big thing as well. I think
quite a lot of tolerance for other people.
It is one of the. That's one where I would say it's an ADHD superpower, is that ability to read other people and to empathise. And sometimes other people don't, and to over-empathise. And as well.
That's I think I've learned from reflection of kind of myself. I've learned that actually there's been a lot of moments in life where I've been overly kind of tolerant of people. I've let people get away with things that I really shouldn't, or they've like kind of taken the mickey out of me, and I just like now I've realised that I can just I need to put my foot down, say no, and actually people will stop. Whereas before I just didn't really see it, especially at school with like bullies and all of that sort of thing. It's actually having the awareness now to say no to people and stand up for what I think, really.
Yeah. Sound definitely positive there. That is good. So any last sort of last minute tips and things you want to share with anyone, just worth of affirmation, like for anyone who's about to sit the exams? Excuse me.
Yeah, don't give in. It's a simple one, but don't give in to the peer pressure. Like, there will be people, and someone said this to me actually the other day, there are going to be the kids stood outside the exam hall 10 minutes before with their notes, stressing everyone else out about it. Me and my friend group, before all our exams, we'd just go and stand by a toilet or outside on the grass, literally 2 minutes before we had to go in. Then we would go in. We'd be relaxed, we'd eat donuts outside. We had like working lunches, we used to call it, and we'd go and get donuts and sweets from the shop, and we'd just eat food before we went in, chill ourselves out, not think about it. And actually that worked quite well for us because we were able to keep ourselves calm and away from the people that were stressing about the exams, because that just stresses you out more. You know you've done it and you can't really, there's nothing else you can actually learn. Like genuinely, there's not much you can learn in that space. It's not going to be a game changer with grades. So there's no point stressing about it, really. Yeah.
Right. So, and that transition you did, because you moved schools, didn't you?
Yeah.
From the school you did your GCSEs to, how did you find it?
It was good, It was, I think, in terms of friend group, because I moved from an all-girls school to a mixed school, so that was one of the biggest differences. Yeah. Because I think the boys take away from a lot of the drama, and actually, in terms of studying, it's kind of, I think we all just get on with it a lot more. We've got that kind of attitude of, we've only got 2 years for this. Like, yeah, it's good to make memories and stuff, but we do kind of need to crack on. We get a long summer next year. That's the time you can make the memories, but you're not gonna get there unless we kind of crack down now. So I think actually that's the big difference from moving that I kind of picked up on. Yeah. And
friendships, has that been fairly smooth sailing, or? Yeah.
It wasn't in my old school. I kind of had quite a lot of challenges with friends where I just let them not take advantage, but kind of, they kind of just, took advantage of me in a way. Whereas now I think I'm able to stand up for like myself, and I know who I want to be with. And as I said, I've only got 2 years of school. So it doesn't matter if I've only got a handful of friends. as long as they're kind of good. So I think I've settled into this friend group a lot better. I haven't had any issues so far.
Yeah.
And we all get on quite well. So, and some of us have been friends since reception, so it's quite
Wow.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah.
Excellent. Listen, Mollie, you've done really well. I know you're a bit nervous before you came on. So yeah, I told you we've done an hour of this. Can you believe that? And yeah, so, and I'm sure what your personal journey, what you've shared with us, will definitely make a difference to some young people out there. And thank you for coming onto this podcast. And yeah, good luck with the rest of your kind of educational career and whatever pathway you decide to do. We probably might bring Mollie back if it's right with you, Mum.
Yeah, I was going to say one last top tip for parents was to make sure you have sets before the exam. Make sure
a set of equipment
in the car, in every room in the house, at grandparents, any place en route to the exam. Have spare calculators, whatever it is, because the one thing we did find was that actually just being that over prepared, it didn't matter, meant that if we did forget something, it wasn't the end of the world, and it wasn't going to mess up the whole exam and the rest of my life. So top tip for parents, make sure you've got 500 of everything.
And actually we did that. We always kept, because we had lockers, we always made sure as a friend group we had a set of something in a locker, so that if anyone forgot it, because I forgot my calculator for my chemistry mock.
Right.
Thankfully it was the mock, but it was a nightmare. We went to everyone's house asking if they had calculators, and the stress levels. By the time I got into the exam, it was just chemistry was the last thing on my mind. So actually, yeah. Panic kit.
No, yeah, definitely. It's worth top tips. Look forward to getting some more top tips from you, Karen, next time when we meet and do the education podcast special that we'll be doing next time in a week's time, actually. So thanks, guys, for coming on to this podcast, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Take care.